drugging Austin. My son has been drugged way too much over the years. I've seen him go through too many traumatic experiences. Like having a botched sedation to go on an airplane to where he loses his sight and is screaming for me and won't believe that I'm standing right next to him and keeps insisting that I'm just a nurse pretending to be his mom. And nobody would even tell me if this was like permanent or if he's gonna get his sight back, like what was happening to my child. Nobody would say anything. And then when we were in Children's Hospital, my son was put through so many different medications with so many different effects and weight losses and weight gains and craziness to try and figure out what was supposed to be the best medication to work for him, that he was only supposed to be on for a year and a half, 2 years tops. But I'm sure he's still being medicated now because from what I heard from Jennifer Donnelly, her report was at one point Austin was jittery and talking really fast and basically high. When I asked her what drug he was on, she said the name of a drug that my son had already been on in Children's Hospital. So I asked her, well, why is he on that again when we already know that that doesn't work for him? But she had no answer for me. These are the idiots that are supposed to be taking care of my child. Supposed to know what's going on with my child. If I had allowed somebody to put my son on a drug that we already knew didn't work for him, I would be called a horrible mother and have my child taken away from me. Be blamed for negligence and extra trauma on my child who only has one kidney. But no, these assholes are allowed to keep traumatizing my child and keep doing unnecessary things to him. He's not supposed to be on any medication anymore, but I'm sure that he is, because Alice Sellers, the Wicked Witch of West Vancouver, would want him to be on drugs so that he would be her little robot and compliant to her. Because she hates children. She doesn't want to have to do the work of actually being a parent, nor is she capable of it, and I don't want her around my child. I don't want my child living in that abusive, sick environment. And he definitely should not be on medication anymore. Even Tim Allen did an episode of Last Man Standing talking about how ridiculous it is that now every single little boy who has energy and would rather be outside playing than sitting in a classroom gets put on medication. Just so that he has to conform with what adults expect. So that they don't have to do any work of engaging with that child. So because adults are lazy, children get drugged. And these medications, there's no proof of long-term effects. That's why there's new class action lawsuits on the news. Like every week there's a different drug with a different class action lawsuit. I can't remember which drug it was, but there was one drug in particular that was quite popular for putting boys with ADD or ADHD on it, and it was causing breasts in boys. And that was recently on TV with a huge lawsuit against them. Now, nobody cares about the long-term effects of what's happening to my child because they just want him to be compliant in the meantime until he ages out of their system. And then they don't give a shit what happens to him or how much damage they've done to him. Nobody cares how many times they drugged my child when they first abducted him because they wouldn't let him see or speak to me or anybody else that he knew when he spent days and days screaming. And nobody would let me calm him down. Nobody once contacted me about what to do with Austin. They just act like I don't exist and just keep traumatizing my child more and more. If you look at his medical records, you know how he responds to me and how I can calm him down without sedation. Children's Hospital saw that very well, because their technique there is not to throw a child in a padded room when they have an issue. They throw your kid into a room that is just all cinder blocks. And so when your kid starts running and ramming his head into the wall repeatedly because he wants out and he's screaming for his lawyer, they just stand there with the door locked and laugh. Because that's so entertaining to them to hear a child screaming for a lawyer because he thinks he's been put in jail. And for him to lose his mind to the point where when they're telling him that they'll open the door if he sits down with his hands on the floor and be quiet, and he's screaming and saying that he is doing these things, and I don't know, and just some other things that just didn't make sense. His mind was completely backwards, and they didn't care. And they just let this happen for hours and hours, and they keep paging the doctor, who doesn't think it's any kind of emergency. So after a couple hours of this, when I go to hunt down the doctor myself, finally I see him walking down the hallway from his office. So I turn around to go back to my son, thinking he's right behind me, and when I turn around again, he stopped to have a casual conversation, just chatting with somebody in the hallway to catch up. Because my son's trauma is not considered an emergency. A little child banging his head against a concrete wall repeatedly for hours is not an emergency to them. And they just kept trying to get rid of me so that I wouldn't be witnessing the damage and the trauma that they're doing to my child. So the second time that they tried to do this to my child, they left the key in the door. So I just pushed past the nurses and unlocked that door and went right in and grabbed my child. And as he was reacting and trying to stomp on my feet, I just ended up holding him, bear hugging him, and letting him stomp on my feet. And I just kept walking around that room for probably about 10 minutes until he calmed down. Meanwhile, they'd ordered sedation again, which, as we know, takes hours and hours for them to receive this sedation before they'll even give it to your child, as he's slamming his head into a concrete wall. Well, this time, within 10 minutes, my child was calm because I was there. And then when the sedation came, they're like, oh, well, we don't need that anymore. Yes, so there you go. What's in Austin's best interest? Having me, his mom. He doesn't need to be drugged. He just needs somebody to love and understand him. His medication was not supposed to be long-term. And nobody cares about the long-term damage that's being done to him. This is my little baby that they're keeping hostage and that they're lying to and keeping drugged up so that he can't understand the truth about what's being done to him. He has nobody to talk to. They denied him to be able to see or speak to anybody he's ever known in his entire life. And they never even asked friends or family if they could take him while this mess got sorted out. They just broke all the laws and gave him to the abusers who were legally not allowed to have any contact with my child, and who I was assured by many social workers would never get their hands on my child. And now look at all the damage and the trauma that's being done to him. How many drugs is he on now?